With that said, we are going to get into our message this morning, which was not coincidentally chosen to go along with Mother's Day. We sang a lot about it, and we're going to be talking a lot about it today, and that thing is grace. Grace. I don't know what it is about moms. I think you've got like a special tank or a reservoir of grace, something about it, and that's what we're going to be talking about today. As you guys know, we've been going through Ezra's help, the book of Ezra, how Ezra helped his people, and more importantly, how God helped his people through Ezra and through others, which I think helps us to give us perspective today. And today we're going to talk about a peculiar form of that help, and that is the resistance of grace. How when people resist us, when they push on us, we push back with grace, and the incredible things that happen when we do that. And so we're going to look at Ezra 4 and Ezra 5, and we are going to get right into it today because we got 2 chapters to cover. So let's get right into Ezra 4. Look at verses 1 through 3 with me. When the adversaries of Judah and Benjamin heard that the returned exiles were building a temple to the Lord, the God of Israel, they approached Zerubbabel and the heads of families and said to them, "Let us build with you, for we worship your God as you do, and we've been sacrificing to him ever since the days of King Esar-Haddon of Assyria, who brought us here." But Zerubbabel, Jeshua, and the rest of the heads of families in Israel said to them, "You shall have no part with us in building a house to our God, but we alone will build to the Lord, the God of Israel, as King Cyrus of Persia has commanded us." So right off the bat, it's a little tricky to understand. God's people are getting to work, and then a group of people comes to help them. You might wonder, why wouldn't they let these people help them? Well, fortunately, the Bible gives us a really powerful word to describe this group of people and says they are adversaries. And this word, it's a powerful word, is a very, very short word. The word is tsar, which in Hebrew is 2 letters, and those 2 letters go a long way because it has a really complicated meaning. The basic meaning is this: adversary or foe. We might use the word enemy. Okay, that's what it can mean. But look at the other parts of the definition of this word. Narrow or tight. You ever notice how hard it can be to deal with people who are really narrow-minded? How easily they can become adversaries or foes? Yeah, that's part of the definition. Or a hard pebble or a flint. You ever had a hard pebble or a stone in your shoe? And how not fun that is. You just want to get it out. That's an adversary, that's a foe, and this is this group of people that wants to come along and supposedly help. Or the last part of the definition is straits or distress. Straits, narrow, trying to distress us, stress us out. That's this group of people. And God's people who came back, they said, no. You are not going to help us do this. Okay? You have to understand this group of people also, most scholars believe these people were Samaritans. Now, when I say Samaritans, you might think, I know that word. I know those people, because that group of people comes up quite a bit. And in the New Testament, something very interesting happens with Samaritans. Jesus specifically told a very powerful story in Luke 10 about a merciful Samaritan, the Good Samaritan, one of the most famous parables told, right? And it was about a Samaritan who was a hero of the story in the New Testament. Then there was a very powerful encounter between Jesus and a Samaritan woman. One of the first missionaries of Jesus Christ was a Samaritan. That's from John 4. But that's New Testament, when Jesus helps us understand how we can effectively be included in his plan, even as outsiders. But in the Old Testament, they're trying to get this temple done. And to get this temple done, they need to stand strong. They need to stand strong. They're not going to compromise on God's instructions to them. Although that can be easy to do at sometimes, right? I mean, think about it. They've got a huge task ahead of them. And a group of people says, hey, we'll help. It'd be pretty easy to say, oh, sweet, thank you. This will make it a lot faster. But they don't. They stood strong. They didn't compromise on God's instructions, and they were very careful about enlisting help. This is important for us to remember. I think we have this tendency to allow people to help us regardless of what they believe and who they are or how good they are at what they're going to help us do. Don't just accept help because it's there. Sometimes it actually isn't truly help, right? And they knew this group of people wasn't truly help. And so they stood strong and they said, no, we're going to get this done. And the reason they needed to get it done in the group that they had wasn't about being alone. You'll probably notice here in verse 3, most of the translations say, we alone will build to the Lord. That word alone is yachar, and it means unitedness. This isn't about being alone like I, me, in a bubble. It's about unity. We, God's people, need to stay united in how we're going to get this done. And if we allow others in who didn't receive the instructions and maybe aren't going to have the same standards that we do to get this temple built right, it's going to mess up the plan. Unity. And it was important for them, and it is important for us. Unity is still a crucial part of our witness. When Jesus Christ, right before he left, he had some very strong words to say to his disciples about unity. And he literally prayed to his Father, right? May I be seen as in you, God, and may my people, my disciples, be seen as in me. And if that happens, if they're united and seen in me, their people will witness you, God. When we are united, God gets witnessed. When we're divided, opposite happens. Let's leave it at that. They wanted to stay united. That's why they didn't accept this group of people's help. And we need to also be similarly united and be careful who we enlist to help us to do God's work. Let's look at verses 4 and 5. Then the people of the land discouraged the people of Judah. It made them afraid to build, and they bribed officials to frustrate their plan throughout the reign of King Cyrus of Persia and until the reign of King Darius of Persia. So now you get to see the real character of these people that are supposedly coming to help, right? Now they're discouraging them. Now they're trying to dismay them. There's a couple of words used here, discouraged and frustrated. And the words are vala and vahal. Vala and vahal. And you'll notice that's very similar. That's intentional. There's a beautiful poetry going on here in this statement. But both of those things were painful for them, right? They were trying to wear out God's people, trying to trouble them, to hasten them, to hurry them, and to dismay them. Anybody in here worn out? Yeah, it's okay, right? A little dismayed, discouraged. It is okay to say, yeah, I'm done. But what do you do with it? These are prayer triggers, folks. When you get worn out, dismayed, discouraged, we should be hitting our knees and praying. God knows where we are, and he's there in those moments. And I am betting that's what these people did when they were discouraged and dismayed by the people around them. They hit their knees, and God intervened, and he did it in a huge, huge way. But the thing for us to remember is don't look down, look up. When things around us get rough, we tend to do this, right? We drop the head, we drop the eyes, things look dark. Look up. Look up at God. Turn those hands around and say, God, this is where I need you the most. Carry me now. And he does it huge here in Ezra 4 and Ezra 5. But the reality is, folks, we need to expect resistance. Expect it. If we're doing what God wants us to do, people are going to push back. Just because people resist us doesn't mean what we're doing is wrong. And sometimes we tend to think that, right? We're doing something and people are resisting it, they're pushing back. We're like, oh, maybe I have done something wrong. And maybe we have. But if we're following this book, and we're following him, we haven't. And we need to expect that people are going to resist when we're doing things for God in the world. Because remember, we're the people of God, not the people of the earth. Right? And as leaders, man, we got to understand this. Leaders should expect resistance. How many of you have seen the movie The Paper? Yeah, pretty much just me. I'm always amazed. This movie is actually nominated for an Oscar. And there's a line in this movie. There is a senior manager who's running a newspaper. He's an older gentleman. And there's a younger manager who's just kind of come into his own, and he's just getting up into leadership, and he is already exhausted with management and leadership, so he's complaining to the older manager, like, how do you do this? And the older manager, looks at the younger manager and says, well, you're in management now. If everybody loved you, you'd be doing something wrong. And it's pretty true. When you get into positions of leadership, people are going to resist, especially if we're putting this word into effect. And this word is, yes, more important than that movie. And Jesus specifically promised us that we would be resisted. If the world hates you, be aware that it hated me before it hated you. If you belong to the world would love you as its own. Because you do not belong to the world, but I have chosen you out of the world, therefore the world hates you. Jesus promised it would happen. If we follow him, people are going to resist, but he is going to help us take care of it. And watch what he does. We're going to read 6 through 16. In the reign of Ahasuerus, in his accession year, they wrote an accusation against the inhabitants of Judah and Jerusalem. And in the days of Artaxerxes, Bishlam and Mithridath and Tabeel and the rest of their hard-to-pronounce associates wrote to King Artaxerxes of Persia. The letter was written in Aramaic and translated. Rehum, the royal deputy, and Shimshai, that's just fun to say, Shimshai the scribe, wrote a letter against Jerusalem to King Artaxerxes as follows. Then Rehum, the royal deputy, Shimshai the scribe, blah, 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 blah. And now this is a copy of the letter they sent. To King Artaxerxes, your servants, the people of the province beyond the river, send greeting. And now may it be known to the king that the Jews who came up from you to us have gone to Jerusalem. They're rebuilding that rebellious and wicked city. They're finishing the walls and repairing the foundations. Now may it be known to the king that if this city is rebuilt and the walls finished, they will not pay tribute, custom, or toll, and the royal revenue will be reduced. Now because we share the salt of the palace, and it's not fitting for us to witness the king's dishonor, therefore we send and inform the king so that a search may be made in the annals of your ancestors. You will discover in the annals that this is a rebellious city, hurtful to kings and provinces, and that sedition was stirred up in it from long ago. On that account, the city was laid waste. We make known to the king that if this city is rebuilt and its walls finished, you will then have no possession in the province beyond the river. Nasty letter, right? No one likes tattletales. And this isn't even just telling what's actually happening. Okay, they write a letter. And before we get into that letter, I want you to understand who some of these players are, because Persian leadership history is pretty confusing. And you'll see here all of a sudden you get this new leader, this Ahasuerus character. I want you to know who it is. If you remember, when we started this series, I walked you through the big four players, the big four kings in Persian history. Then you got these guys kind of thrown in. I want you to understand their role here. As best as we can understand, Ahasuerus came in because King Cyrus, remember the king who was in charge when they founded Persian history? He's in charge, and when you're in charge, what happens? People resist, right? And people were resisting, and there was war, and so King Cyrus was distracted by those wars, so he tapped one of his sons, Cambyses, and he said, I need you to help lead the region. And so Cambyses comes along, and he is the viceroy, and his name is Ahasuerus in Chaldean. Go figure, confusing, I know, right? That's who this character is. Then following him, you get a whole other leader, and there's this Artaxerxes guy. And if you've read Ezra before, you're saying, wait a second, there's an Artaxerxes here, and then there's an Artaxerxes later. How does this guy show up twice? It's a different person. It is a completely different leader, and back then, kings commonly had more than one name. It was their God-given name or their Christian name, right? So my name is Scott, your name is fill in the blank, but you probably have titles and roles and other things that are your name, and Artaxerxes is one of those. It means righteous ruler. And so this guy comes in, and who is he? He is a scoundrel and a clown, all right? He is a Magian usurper. When I say Magian, I mean he's from the Magi. You guys familiar? Remember the group that comes to visit Jesus? They are Magi. He comes from Magi. He is a usurper who impersonated the younger son of Cyrus, whose name was Smerdis, by the way. How's that for top baby names? Smerdis got impersonated, and this Magian guy who's known as Artaxerxes is actually in power for less than a year. How crazy is that? Imagine if our president was like someone just impersonating someone else. Not going to happen, right? Persian history is crazy. But that's who this person was who's involved as this letter is coming back into the rulers. But more importantly than them is this letter. I want you to notice something that's missing from this letter. The temple. The thing God's people are actually doing, right? The building is the temple, not the city walls, not the foundation. This is just like Satan, right? Who's trying to remove God from everything. Schools, government, workplace, take him out. This letter is not about the temple. But all God's people are doing is working on the temple. And this letter literally dances completely around that. It's a bunch of lies. Remember we talked about expecting resistance? Part of that resistance is lies, and we need to expect it. The only way to combat truth is lies, and that's what Satan has always done, and that's what Satan is still doing. This whole letter is about walls of the city. They're working on the temple, not walls of the city. Satan's a master liar. Was at the beginning, he is now. We need to be careful. We need to watch for it. We need to expect it. He's going to throw them at us, and you respond to it with the truth, and that's exactly what God's people did. The other thing I want you to note about his response is he starts talking about money. Royal revenue will be reduced. They won't pay tribute, custom, or toll. This isn't a money issue. If you've been here for a few weeks, if you read through Ezra, you know these people are loaded to build the temple, right? They have all this money to build the temple. This isn't a money issue. And yet look what they try to insert into the equation. Why? Because Satan loves to make us fight over money. Loves it. When we start talking my stuff, Satan is in there trying to get us to fight over it. And this isn't a money issue. But they try to make it an issue. And the last thing they try to do is to make the king take it personally. They start to make this like people against the king. The people aren't against the king. Right? The remnant, the group of people that have come back to do this, they're not against the king at all. Now they're for God. And sometimes when we're for God, when we're living this out, we are going to be seen as in opposition to someone in charge. But it doesn't mean that we are. And you know who's behind that, by the way? Yeah. Satan. Who loves to make us take things too personally. Someone might do something that we don't like. It doesn't mean they're doing it because of us. It doesn't mean they're trying to take a shot at us. It just might mean they're doing something they think is right. And it might be different than what we might want. But it doesn't mean they're doing it to hurt us. And we don't need to be taking it so personally. That's what they try to do in this letter. And that wasn't the case at all. So check out what happens next in verses 17 through 24. The king sent an answer to Rehum the royal deputy and Shimshai the scribe and the rest of their associates who live in Samaria and in the rest of the province beyond the river, greeting. And now the letter that you sent to us has been read in translation before me. So I made a decree, and someone searched and discovered that this city has risen against kings from long ago, and that rebellion and sedition have been made in it. Jerusalem has had mighty kings who ruled over the whole province beyond the river, to whom tribute, custom, and toll were paid. Therefore, issue an order that these people be made to cease, and that this city not be rebuilt until I make a decree. Moreover, take care not to be slack in this matter. Why should damage grow to the hurt of the king? Then when the copy of King Artaxerxes' letter was read before Rehum and the scribe Shimshai and their associates, they hurried to the Jews in Jerusalem, and by force and power made them cease. At that time, the work on the house of God in Jerusalem stopped and was discontinued until the second year of the reign of King Darius of Persia. Pretty tough answer letter, right? But you'll notice in this response, this order, it relates only to the city walls. No discussion of the temple, right? It's not about the temple at all. And God's people could have been like, all right, sweet, so they're talking about the walls. We're working on the temple, so we're going to keep going. Right? Looking for the loophole. I would have looked for it. Okay? But they don't. They stopped. How gracious is that? And when I say stopped, I want you to understand how long they stopped. 15 years. That is a long time. 15 years for them is a generation. Remember? Ladies are getting married at 12, 13. Having kids right about that age. Every 15 years, you're talking a whole generation has passed. And they stop. Imagine how discouraging this must have been for them. They came fully loaded to do this work, and now they've got to stop. But they stopped because they understood something that we need to remember today. The devil may win the battle, but God wins the war. There are times in our life that we feel like we can't see through it. We're at a wall, things are dark, and we can't see our way out of it. That might mean that the devil has won a small battle, but it doesn't mean that it's over. God is in charge. You guys know stories, right? All stories, all good stories, they have sad parts. Good movies, good books. No one likes a story that's all happy, happy, joy, joy. We don't, because we know it's not real life. If you've ever written stories, you know that one of the main plot stages of writing a story is a climax, when everything comes to a head, and it's usually quite sad. And you're on the edge of your seat trying to figure out what's going to happen. These are those moments in our lives. We have to remember that the world stop may be God's pause. Not a complete stop forever, never going to happen, but a pause. Hold. Wait. God's saying, I am still on this. We have recently tried this at home. I have a 2-year-old, so when I use the word stop, that tends to evoke some tears. And so I decided I would try something slightly different, and rather than say stop, I just say pause. Hold, that thing that you want to keep doing that you've done all day long. We're going to do it again tomorrow, just not right now. And guess what? No tears. What's the difference between stop and pause? Hope. Hope. When I say pause, she doesn't hear stop forever, never do it again. She hears pause. I can do it again later. And that's what God says to us. That's what he says here. You might hear stop, folks, but just hold, just hold, just hold. I'm on this. Trust me. I'm going to take care of this because the devil may win the battle, but I win the war. The key for us is this. Don't quit. Just don't quit. Sometimes the greatest thing you can do is put one foot ahead of the other one. Don't quit. God is on it. And check out what he does here. Chapter 5, verses 1 and 2. Now the prophets, Haggai and Zechariah, son of Iddo, prophesied to the Jews who were in Judah and Jerusalem in the name of the God of Israel who was over them. Then Zerubbabel, son of Shealtiel, and Jeshua, son of Jozadak, set out to rebuild the house of God in Jerusalem. And with them were the prophets of God helping them. Look at that. They got a whole new message, which proves once again, right, that God's law is greater than human law. The message of God is greater than the message of man, the message of humanity. Most of us have call waiting. You ever been on the phone and then someone else calls? You're like, man, I really want to get that other call. Right? And you say, I'm sorry, I got to call you back. Someone else is calling, right? Bigger name on the other line. You've done it. Come on. Right? This is what happens with God. Listening to the world, talking to the world, seeing the world. You're like, whoa, hold on, I got a bigger name on the other line. It's God. I got to take this one. And that's what they do. Like God said to rebuild the temple, so they got back to work because they remembered that God's law is greater than human law every single day. And they did it. And then what happens? Resistance. Check it out, verses 3 to 5. At the same time, Tatnai, the governor of the province beyond the river, and Shethar-Bozenai and their associates came to them and spoke to them thus, Who gave you a decree to build this house and to finish this structure? They also asked them this, What are the names of the men who are building this building? But the eye of their God was upon the elders of the Jews, and they did not stop them until a report reached Darius, and then answer was returned by letter in reply to it. So they got back to work, and of course resistance comes, and God's people didn't put up a fight. So important for us to remember. When people resist, don't put up a fight. And they didn't hear because they understood that God was going to take care of it. Let God take care of these people that come in and start asking questions. They trusted him. Right? This word, the eye of their God was upon them. This is a powerful, powerful idea. The eye, the ayin of God. He's not only looking at you, he's pouring out into you to do his work. And they trusted that. They said, ask all the questions you want. God's in charge and we're going to keep going, but we're going to listen and be there. We're not going to put up a fight. This is what we are called to do. And look what happens when we have that kind of approach. We're going to read through the rest of the chapter now. The copy of the letter that Tatnai, the governor of the province beyond the river, and Shethar-Bozenai and his associates, the envoys who were in the province beyond the river, sent to King Darius. They sent him a report in which was written as follows. To Darius the king, all peace. May it be known to the king that we went to the province of Judah, to the house of the great God. It's being built of hewn stone, and timber is laid in the walls. This work is being done diligently and prospers in their hands. Then we spoke to those elders and asked them, who gave you a decree to build this house and to finish this structure? We also asked them their names for your information, so that we might write down the names of the men at their head. This was their reply to us. We are the servants of the God of heaven and earth, and we are rebuilding the house that was built many years ago, which a great king of Israel built and finished. But because our ancestors had angered the God of heaven, he gave them into the hand of King Nebuchadnezzar of Babylon the Chaldean, who destroyed this house and carried away the people to Babylonia. However, King Cyrus of Babylon, in the first year of his reign, made a decree that this house of God should be rebuilt. Moreover, the gold and silver vessels of the house of God, which Nebuchadnezzar had taken out of the temple in Jerusalem and had brought into the temple of Babylon, these King Cyrus took out of the temple of Babylon, and they were delivered to a man named Sheshbazzar, whom he had made governor. He said to him, take these vessels, go and put them in the temple in Jerusalem, and let the house of God be rebuilt on its site. Then this Sheshbazzar came and laid the foundations of the house of God in Jerusalem, and from that time until now it has been under construction, and it is not yet finished. And now, if it seems good to the king, have a search made in the royal archives there in Babylon to see whether a decree was issued by King Cyrus for the rebuilding of this house of God in Jerusalem. Let the king send us his pleasure in this matter. Very different letter. Way more gracious. And you know, one of the things that I think kept them at work, one of the things that caused these challengers, these resistors, to allow them to keep working was the value of good work. Look at Ezra 5:8 again. This work is being done diligently and prospers in their hands. We need to remember that people take notice when we work well. When we do excellent things, impressive things, people notice that. So we need to be excellent for his sake. The reason this work continued is they saw what they were doing. Like, this is incredible. Should probably let them keep doing it. What an awesome thing is if Christians, right? We get witnessed for a number of things. Mercy, absolutely. Truth, I sure hope so. But what if excellence was one of them? What if people went around and saw what we did, what we made, the way we took care of our homes, our cars, our families, and said, that looks so good, that must be a Christian that did it. Wouldn't that be an awesome part of our witness? If we literally did everything as if we were to do it for the Lord, that's pretty much what the Bible says. The value of good work, folks. It worked then and it works now when we are excellent for his sake. And we're reminded here of our servanthood. They actually say we are servants, right? And we are servants, but we're servants of God, not humans. So there's a little humility in here, right? Say, hey, we're just servants. We just work here. God said to do it, so we're doing it. But notice, too, the challenge in here. By the way, King, we're servants of God, not you. Very cool statement. But there is humility in here, right? And you can really tell when they get to this section where they talk about what their ancestors had done before them and the humility of saying, we messed up. God's people are not afraid to admit their mistakes. God's people are not afraid to say, we made a mistake. And I'm sure the humility here was received by the king. This is something we are trying in our house already. Literally trying to teach my daughter, I'm sorry, and then the immediate response, which is, I forgive you. I say it, parents say it, kids say it. Doesn't matter who you are, there's no rank and hierarchy. We say, I'm sorry, and then the immediate response is, I forgive you. It's the flow, it's the pattern of human life. It's been that flow ever since the beginning, since the first mistake. But we need to not be afraid of saying, I'm sorry, I made a mistake. They admitted it here, and look what happened in response. The other thing, if you guys noticed, I read through this, and some of you might have been having trouble staying awake. It gets a little bit factual and boring here, right? But notice how cool this is. There's no defensiveness in here. There's no posturing. There's no exaggeration. They just stick with the facts. This is why we're doing it, and this is where we've been. This is really important for us to remember. Just tell your story. Just stick with the facts. Just tell your story. We don't need to be defensive. We don't need to posture. This goes for our day-to-day living. This goes for our witness. Just tell your story. What God has done for you and what he's done in this book. God will take care of the rest. The reality is we cannot force people to believe us. You can't and I can't. So don't even try. We can't make it happen. All you can do is tell the truth. And this letter, as boring as it sometimes appears, is just that. It's just the truth. I often hear people get so frustrated because they're like, I've told them and I've told them and I've told them, and they're just not listening. What do I do? And the reality is, the answer is nothing. Just keep telling them the truth in love. God's going to take care of the belief part. We cannot make people believe us. Only God can. So stick with the facts, tell the truth, and let God take care of the rest. And then as this whole thing closes, notice the deference they have for the king. Right? They say, let the king send us his pleasure in this matter. It's not because they're pushovers. They're deferring to the king because they trust God. They really aren't worried about it. Like, I've seen God work through kings before, right? I defer to you, king, because I know God's in charge. And so you look this up. You go crazy. You look at the annals. You look at the history. You're going to see that we're doing the right thing because they trust God. We can defer to leaders as people today because we trust that God can use them and work through them, even when they're not doing the right thing. God is still in charge. We can defer to people as an exercise of our trust with God. And of course, you can't miss the grace in this whole response, right? There's no fighting back. There's no pushing back. This letter doesn't say we're going to keep working because we always could have been working and the last letter was a lie. There's no fight. They resisted with grace. Because grace makes the absolute best impression. Always has, always will. This is the resistance of grace. This is the resistance that we are called to even today. Because grace wins. Grace wins. This is why Jesus said, you've heard that it was said, an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth. But I say to you, do not resist an evildoer. But if anyone strikes you on the right cheek, turn the other also. And if anyone wants to sue you and take your coat, give your cloak as well. And if anyone forces you to go 1 mile, go also the 2nd mile. Because grace wins. This is the shocking nature of what grace is, right? Grace is giving love when no love is deserved at all. Grace is when someone comes at you and challenges you and makes up lies about you, and you resist by loving them, by not fighting back, by not pushing back. Why do we do that? Because it gets their attention. Right? Because the world pushes back. The world fights back. Watch an action movie. Right? We are trained. We are ingrained from childhood on revenge and fighting back. And Christ says no. Love back and watch what happens. And it's incredible what happens. It's what Jesus stood for his entire life and what he stood for on the cross. And as we close, we're going to take communion by remembering that and hopefully letting that fuel us. As we commune with the one who lived and died with grace, may that fuel us to show that kind of grace in resistance to the challenges of the world. Let's pray before we take communion. God, thank you so much for the reminder that you call us to resist with grace. When people challenge us, may we love them back. And God, when we don't feel like doing it, may we turn to you and be filled with you so that we can. And as we look for inspiration and example, may we turn to you and look to you. You, the one who allowed your Son to die on a cross for us. As we take communion, we remember that. The body of your Son graciously given for us. As we take this cup of juice, may we remember the blood of your Son graciously given for us. And then may we do this, not just take this, do this in remembrance of you. Live it out by resisting the challenges of the world with your grace and your mercy. God, we thank you. It's in your Son's name and through your Spirit we pray. Amen.